of you watching live, and I hope you are watching this live, this is our second day experimenting with live Textron gangs. So up front, let me apologize in case anything doesn't go exactly as we hope it would, but that is the nature of live TV. We have a great gang. It's kind of our usual. So this, you may know this as our Wednesday gang because we used to record it on Tuesday and play it on Wednesday. But truth be told, in my mind, it was always our Tuesday gang anyway. So let me introduce you to our Tuesday gang. Their first, well, Mitchell's been here yesterday, but their first appearance is for the new year. We've got Dan O'Brien. Dan looks like he's back home in I'm going to say it's chilly Boston. Yeah. Dan, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Alan.
And we've got also up north. Well, I guess we got a lot of Northerners here. We have Kate Scarcella. Kate, Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year.
Even further up north, though, actually New Hampshire may be further north than where Chris is, right? But north nonetheless, Chris Blask. Chris, Happy New Year, my friend.
Happy New Year. Good to see you.
And then Colorado's, well, it's not really north, but he's high.
Always.
Our friend Mitch Ashley. Mitch, Happy New Year. And of course, Mike Vizard. Gang, welcome. Mike, let's kick today's segments off. The first one involves a love affair with cars. That's a long American tradition. But well, these are AI cars. Maybe it's a little different.
Well, the CES show is this week, and as usual, they're talking a lot about cars, and NVIDIA kind of took center stage this year and talked about a platform called, I think if I get this right, Alpha Mayo or something close to that. And they were talking about that alongside robotics and the fact that they've got a new chip called Vera Rubin in production. But alongside them, SoundHound was talking about how there's going to be a new AI interface into your cars, and we might have AI agents, and this is how we're going to interact with our cars. And once again, we're kind of reinventing the driving experience, and NVIDIA is promising us in a Bullwinkle moment this time for sure we'll get autonomous vehicles absolutely correct because, well, these systems will be able to recognize anomalies. So, for example, if there's a ball bouncing down the street, the system will correlate that to the fact that there's probably a child somewhere nearby, and that's quite something that you can't quite do with existing AI systems. Chris, what's your take on what's going on here? Different kind of driving experience. It might take a little while before it shows up in a showroom, but what do you think?
It's interesting that this is a sort of the New Year episode. And a year ago, I was on board, Mark Twain and Sam Clemens at Alan. You've seen those boats, right? Electric, autonomous, cybernetic vessels. Yeah, probably in Boca Raton. I was finishing up the 5,000 miles of sailing about down the coast at the time. And we had on this show, we were talking about agentic AI. So in my mind, it was early last year, we started talking about agentic. And now we're talking about agentic AI in autonomous vehicles. So it's not all that new. And in the B box coming up next, we're talking about lower CPU GPUs, lower CPU AIs. And these things are all just coming together. So short, yes, I like the way you introed it, Alan. We're going to fall in love with our cars. We already do. It's a high trust environment. Literally, you're inside it. It's moving across the landscape. It's going to exercise a lot of the topics that a lot of us have been, talking about and engineering around for the last year. So how can we trust this? Well, we're going to have to, because they're cars, and we already have to. And like everything else, we're approaching limits. The existing ways of doing things are getting fragile. So I think that my net is that I'm repeating myself saying this because we've been coming down this path for a while, and this is just a perfect example.
I'm not entirely sure I'm going to fall in love with my car again, though, because I'm not really doing much inside my car anymore other than maybe reading a book or watching a movie or whatever else is going to be happening because, well, it's all autonomous. So at the end of the day, I might be less engaged with my vehicle, and it's certainly not going to be, some people say you are what you drive. Maybe I'm not anymore. Maybe it's just this transportation vehicle. Alan, I know that's heresy where you come from, but what do you think?
Well, let me poll the gang real quick. How many of you have some kind of autonomous capability in your cars right now? Anyone?
Low level, right? I mean, the auto stop detection, adaptive cruise control, right? You were talking like L1, L2 level.
Parking, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have truth be told, it's my wife's. But Dan, you've been in the vehicle with me, the iX. That if you go on the highway, it does do autonomous. I forget what they call it, but you press a button and it keeps you in your lane. It slows up, speeds up based upon traffic. It could change lane if you put your signal on. Dan, even the limited stuff you have in your car, do you trust it?
I don't think it's something you rely on. It's something where sometimes, an automatic braking thing will kick in a second before I was going to brake, right? Massachusetts driver here. So, I'm probably a little more aggressive than the autonomous machine at this point. But I can say, it's probably, saved me once or twice in terms of, a fender bender or, having to swerve back into my lane because I didn't see a car in the blind spot or something. I think the experience in the car is going to go kind of the way of the bus, the train, the plane, right? Think about all these transportation, kind of mediums that we have where you're kind of not in control of driving the machine, right? What do we do in those scenarios? Feels like that's a lot of what we'll do in the car. Maybe we'll get more creative. It's maybe more a personal experience. You're not in a, kind of communal, group transportation setup, but to me, that's where the experience kind of goes here.
What exactly are you getting at there, Dan?
I wasn't getting at anything, Alan. Maybe
if we can't do it in a communal experience, we're doing privately.
I think you're saying that we'll all probably be just looking at our phones while we're in a car too. Just like
but do you really need your phone if you have a good screen?
Well, true, but I don't know if we can separate ourselves from the phone.
And I think that's this thing with the SoundHound piece of this, and some of it is once we get over the trust factor of turning the driving over to the machine, if you will, right? Like, okay, I trust it. It's not going to kill me. And that's not going to be an easy thing to get over, but even if you've ever driven in a Waymo, how many of you can relax in a Waymo, right? Asking people out here live. And the nice thing about live, if you're watching this on LinkedIn or something, comment ahead. Tell us what your experience is.
So to your point about that, though, and I was calculating that in my head the other day. So I drove from New York to Newark, and I went to see the New York Sirens, which is a professional women's hockey team. And I was figuring out the driving there, and I was like, 15 to 20% of the people who are on the road with me are just flat out idiots and more dangerous than a machine. So,
that's in New York, not Florida. It's worse.
Yeah. What I wonder is that if there's an accident, who gets sued? Does the machine get sued if you're in one of these cars? Mm-hmm. The insurance would be different, yeah? I mean,
well, the insurance goes, I think, with the vehicle.
Yeah, but I wonder if we could transfer the issue if you get into an accident to a machine if it's actually autonomous.
I can imagine a world where if you're on a fully autonomous driving, you'll actually have cheaper insurance than you will on a human. I mean, Musk has pulled out a bunch of stats that kind of show that there's fewer car accidents when you're an FSD versus just people driving around on themselves. Right.
The biggest problem with the FSD is people drive, the other people who do drive, right? If it was all FSDs, we probably would have little to no accidents. I'm sorry.
But isn't this the ultimate car team? I mean, when I was a kid in the early 70s, looking on the future, I would say, well, obviously at some point the cars drive themselves. And when I was ongoing, my kids all don't know this, and the oldest is 30. I've been saying it since they were born. At some point, we're going to say, hey, grandma, grandpa, tell me that story how you used to pilot a vehicle at 70 miles an hour, inches away, because that's insane. And Musk is right on this one. The stats are already, self-driving cars are safer than humans, but we don't trust them. But we literally have military autonomous artifacts moving around our space now, and we have to develop the trust model. And this is the point. So it's like so many other things. This has been coming not just for decades, for centuries. We're at this point right now. Cars are the perfect example because while the technology is probably better than almost all drivers now, we have to figure out how to trust them real fast in the next couple of years.
Well, I think that the whole trust issue too, Chris, is really about experience. It's once you've experienced it, you've done it a couple of times. Okay, you're getting accustomed to it. This works. All right, I'll get onto a bus that maybe doesn't have a bus driver. I'll let the car do these things for me now that I've seen that it can do it, or I have controls to take over if I need to. So it's learning that through an experience or a series of experiences. That's what builds the trust, whether it's AI and we're developing software using it, or it's autonomous driving.
Well, and so much of this is really about AI.
Most every time.
Hold on, one at a time. Dan, you go first, then Chris.
No, it's just building on Mitch's point that I think he's right. Like, I think we actually do experience a fair amount of autonomy. We've just kind of forgotten it and gotten over it, right? I mean, certainly there's a pilot involved in some elements of flying, but a lot of the flight you take across the country is on autopilot, right?
Well, but what Mitch said is the key, and this is with AI right now. The state, what we're calling AI and how we're using it. This is the perfect point. We develop trust over time. I don't trust autonomous cars because I've played with them. You said it exactly right. As I get more experience, I will trust it more. And we flip the tables on this. We need to allow our systems to develop experience as well. And that's the kind of things we're doing in the world. So we can have some track record in this now that as you let the systems actually have a memory effective for the purpose, you can have systems develop trust. So this is cars and humans is this recursive thing that, like I say, we're looping on this right now because the cars are coming out that are safer than we are, but we don't trust them, and we're going to have to.
So here's what I want to see if I want to have trust, though. I want a label on the car that tells me as another driver that thing is autonomous. And then eventually, probably I want a label on the car that tells me humans driving it when there's more autonomous vehicles than there are human-driven vehicles.
Well, I have that on my boat, for instance. Chris, you may know this, right? So a lot of boats have autopilot or, heading and stuff like that. And if the boat's in front of you on the back, they usually have like an LED light that is blinking in some pattern that shows the boat's in auto. And it helps. But, we'll get over the trust thing. I want to kind of move to another piece of this segment. But before I do, there will be no shortage of smart people who come up with brilliant ideas on how to fill our time up in these vehicles while it's driving itself, right? Whether it's shopping, communicating, educating, or even massages or something, right? On your seats. Nature abhors a vacuum. We'll figure out what to do at that time. But Mike, there was also a CES part of this, the CES announcement on robotics that I don't want to ignore, right? I saw before the holidays, it was, I think, a show in China with some amazing Chinese robotics. We have some good robotics companies here in the U.S. as well, right? Tesla being one of them, Figure being another, Boston Dynamics another. This is going to be an age of robotics, and I'm like a little boy watching these kinds of announcements.
The car is just a robot at this point, but it's a type of robot.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I feel like if we look at the kind of autonomous driving maturity curve, that probably gives us a pretty good sense as to how robotics plays out. Maybe robotics moves a little bit faster, off of some of those learnings, but there's a lot of principles that can be, kind of fully carried over there.
Absolutely.
I worked with a car company in Detroit, and one of the things that they're predicting is that we won't be buying cars anymore. It's actually just going to be one big service, cars as a service. So it's interesting to see where this goes.
Well, I'm in love with it then if it's a service, because then I'm just going to call them up and say, I need a small truck today, and then tomorrow I want something really fast, right?
Yeah.
And then we'll rent our garages to them to have those place to house all those cars.
That's kind of the Uber model. I remember when Uber first started, my friend Brad was early money in Uber, and Mitch Raj was as well. And that was the model. You had, originally they were thinking autonomous driving was going to be a lot sooner. And they were going to get rid of the drivers basically and have an Uber fleet that would take you everywhere. Anyway, hey, we've got to move on to our next segment. It's kind of related. It's still around autonomy and AI, but we're talking about AI PCs. You know, a lot of people kind of chuckle when they hear about AI PCs. I admit AI PCs were a big story last year, but a little short on what was the beef in there, right? Where was the beef? But maybe we're making some progress on this one. Mike, what do we have?
Well, HP was kind of banging the drum for this the most at the show, but they were talking about a new series of notebooks that they're coming out with that are based on AI accelerator processors and CPUs. The AI accelerators are from companies like Qualcomm and Intel and AMD, but the one thing that was missing was a GPU for these things. And what they're saying is that for a certain level of performance, at least, I can run some of these models locally if I'm a developer or a data scientist, and I don't need to maybe invoke as many cloud resources to do that. And I can lower the total cost of building AI applications. Dan O'Brien, I know Futurum has a report on this topic and expects that AI PCs in the next few years will become more dominant. But what's your take on where are we on this adventure?
Yeah, listen, I think similar to the last segment, we're kind of in the stage of we're planning for the eventuality, right? Like this is where it's going. And I think, as you look at PC replacement cycles, anywhere 2 years probably on the short end, 5 years on the longer side, people that are buying PCs today are really gearing towards the AI PC. I mean, I think we see about 88% purchase intent for AI PCs as we, interview enterprise decision makers in the Futurum research. But, I think as AI becomes more personal, we're going to see it really move to the edge. And, for a lot of the workforce, that's going to be, really at the PC side of things. I think you'll see a kind of typical tiering that you see, in the consumer electronics space, the PC space, where, at the high end, you'll probably still have a GPU. Think about, coding laptops that developers are using where enterprises want to use, fine-tuned, kind of local models for their development efforts. And then, the kind of more, general purpose worker, probably less compute intensive tasks happening on their laptop. The way that we've gotten these models, these small models quantized down, you really don't need all of that compute power that a full-on NVIDIA GPU brings. Qualcomm, Intel, AMD, many others are going to be kind of good enough at the mid-range and lower end of the portfolios.
Let me make just one cheap plug real quick. I had a great discussion on this with Nick Patience, one of the Futurum research. He leads the AI research team at Futurum Group. And this is a session in our Predict 2026 show coming next week, January 15th. You could register for free right now, techstrongevents.com, techstrongevents.com. Click the Predict 2026 and register. Nick, I believe, kind of led some of the research here and has some great thoughts on, not just on AI PCs, but let's call it AI on the edge and everything else, right? And it's a great session. Don't miss it. Along with that, we have almost all of the Futurum research analysts doing sessions at Predict, and each in their own specialty. So it's a great day of learning and predictions. TechStrongEvents.com. Sorry for the cheap commercial plug, but go ahead, Mitch.
No, it's interesting. I think everybody expected all of a sudden we were going to flip over and everything was going to be an AI PC in 2025, and just the buying cycles, the life cycle of how long PCs last within the enterprise and the planning they do for that turnover. But that's very much the data. Both Nick and also Olivier Branchard, who heads up the kind of PC hardware part of our analyst practice, has some really good insights. There's a report that has that stat that Dan was quoting, around 88% planning on including AI as a major factor in their PC purchases over the next 2 to 5 years. So it's there. And I think most of us are thinking I don't need the AI data center of the world. I need something that's doing more inferencing that agents can use to process. Software can run on locally. I can run models. We see a lot of companies now, or model makers making versions that you can run locally with, OLAMA, but also even that are optimized just to run locally on a device. Same thing's going to happen or is happening on our phones, doing that there as well. So I think we're going to live in a world where AI can run in a lot of places. Maybe it's going to run on our TVs someday. We'll see.
We,
So
we live in that world. We live in that world already, right? And I think this is a classic example of a huge sort of endemic wave. And we're talking about the enthusiasts. I mean, if you're an AI enthusiast and you say, okay, I want to do coding on my PC and I want to do lots of graphic development, that's what all our narrative is about. But there are infinitely more retail locations. I mean, we're running a lot of AI right now, not just on CPUs, old CPUs, because that's perfectly fine for most applications. So, and this is an iterative theme on our weekly conversation here. We sit here and talk about, how we need, $100 million worth of GPUs to do our thing, but almost everyone on earth who uses information systems isn't us. They're using systems that the capabilities currently available are perfectly fine for. In fact, they're fantastic. So yes, on this, will we have more, AI built brand new hardware PCs for first world top end applications? Absolutely. We'll also see all of this AI moving into existing infrastructure where it already works perfectly fine.
I'm pleased to see that the laws of physics have not been suspended. And the last time I checked, things that run locally run faster. And if I got to go across a network, there's more latency. So this is pretty awesome to me.
Yeah. Mike, I totally agree. And it also offers some privacy, right? That we so freely give up personally. From a cybersecurity perspective, I like the idea of running locally. So
I have a confession. It wasn't my Nick Patience session. It was Olivier's session, Mitch. I'm glad you brought that up. But he's also on Predict 2026. So you're going to get it. You're going to get more for your money there. And Olivier did do some great research there. But guys, I think we're missing the story here. The story isn't that we're going to be using more AI-enabled PCs or AI-enabled devices. The story is we're going to be able to do that without having expensive GPUs in them. And it goes back to something that we talked about at yesterday's show about we're doing more inferencing than training. And for a lot of this inference stuff and the mundane, if you will, uses of what we're going to do with our AI, we don't necessarily need those high-end GPUs. Yes, there'll be some corner cases, right? Well, we used to have scientific calculators instead of regular calculators if you're of an age. But for the most part, you don't need the GPU to do a lot of this kind of work. And I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, and to Dan's point, they're going to be smaller models that are going to run locally, that are going to be personalized to you, and it just won't be developers and data scientists. I think ultimately many end users are going to have their own little personal models that run locally, and they will interact with other models in the cloud, and the whole thing becomes a whole lot more distributed.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I think as AI gets cheaper, we're going to see proliferation continue to expand, right? So all this is a good thing in my mind, in that the more that you don't need to spend up to a certain price point to get AI locally, the more people will be able to afford that and adopt that. I also think that, if you're a PC maker, how many models in your lineup are going to be not compatible with an AI world going forward, right? I mean, to me, this is news, yes, but, I don't see the PC OEM space filling their lineup with a lot of PCs that can't handle AI locally over time. So I think we're at the point now where, last year, a lot of the portfolio transitioned over, this year even more. As we get 2-3 years out, this becomes a standard feature in my mind versus a differentiated feature.
I don't even know if I'd call it a feature. I think it's just, that's how PCs are, right?
Yeah, whatever.
Us to doing business, just built in.
So would you buy a PC today that didn't have an AI accelerator in it?
Yes.
You would.
I mean, yes. Again, everything's an AI accelerator. I mean, it depends what you mean. Like our last segment, we're talking about cars, right? And this is it's less about, so local sovereign systems. I want my car not to be cloud enabled. I will trust it based on the sensors arrangements and so forth that I can understand myself. But, and this, Kate, your comment, right? So I'm running a small business and I want my data to stay local, and I want an AI, I want some sort of semantic system to navigate that. And that's all that really matters to me. I don't need huge systems for that. And I don't want to spread that information around. I don't want to trust my business continuity or my operation, heaven help me, or my vehicle that I'm in, to need that connection. It's just not really necessary. We're over. And don't get me wrong, I'm a geek. I love all the super tech, but you can make it really small and it just works without a lot of complexity. We talk about on shows like this.
And doesn't it go along the same lines of what we spoke about a lot last year about these huge data centers that are being built for something that we don't even know yet? We're building for today what is going to be happening tomorrow. And I think, in fact, tomorrow, we may actually require less, not more. So, I think this is the prime example of what we talked about last year,
Skynet has to have somewhere to run, Kate. So.
Yeah. I was talking to JLL about that very issue, though, yesterday, and they were pointing out that while they think that there's going to be more capacity than ever, they did note that funding for data centers is under pressure now because people are starting to ask that question about, well, do we have enough capacity and will we get the return on investment on that?
Right. And we have to ask that because I really do believe that we have not seen yet this full capacity of what it has to offer. And I think we're building way too much. And,
this is going back to last year, actually last month. IBM CEO Lou Gerstner, right, came out. We did a show on this. I think I did a Shimmy Says on this, on the economics of AI factories, of AI data centers, and including power and cooling and everything else. But speaking of IBM CEOs, I wanted to spend a little time today acknowledging the passing of Lou Gerstner, who really kind of changed the very fabric of Big Blue. We've got a few ex-IBMers on our panel today, Dan and Kate, I believe both of you. I don't know if either one of you were there when Lou was there.
Yeah.
Kate, you were?
I was, yeah. And hey, I have the book that came out that he wrote, Who Says Elephants Can't Dance? And I joined in 1998. One of the things that I believe that was extremely controversial at the time was, and even now, if you hear it, it almost sounds like crazy. The last thing IBM needs right now is vision. And when you think about that, it's like he was so right. It wasn't vision, it was the execution failure that came into play with this. So IBM already had plenty of vision, bold strategies, future roadmaps, and really grand plans. But what it lacked was operational discipline. And so cost control, accountability, customer focus, and the ability to execute what was already there. So his insight was phenomenal into services and customer services. And he turned around a company, and he saw that we needed to, stabilize, a cultural change, which was, huge. And I was there, when, I was there with OS2 War and Lotus. And then I was there with Tivoli, and then I was there, I was there for over 20 years. And, when they bought internet security systems, and you saw a big difference on how you can't have, at the time, product and services in the same group competing, because it basically, one was going to win out over the other, and services, won. And I personally saw really good products die. In fact, we used to call it the IBM or the Product Witness Protection Program, right? Because really phenomenal products, people, from a security perspective. And you saw his vision continue through the next leaders that would come along and make some really tough decisions and not get rid of Tivoli, but they basically got rid of the Tivoli brand and went into IBM security systems. And, so phenomenal leadership that continued even after he left. And that's true leadership.
I remember two things when I was at Computer World and InfoWorld during his years there. And when he was running IBM, and the two things that I remember him doing, one was everybody kind of remembers, but the IBM brand became about the people, right? It was the expertise of IBM, and it was a shift away from IBM, the product company, more towards IBM, do business with us because we have the best and smartest people, and the whole marketing tenor changed. And then the second thing that people don't talk a whole lot about, but I do remember, is IBM quietly began funding all kinds of little open source initiatives, and they were moving heavily into Linux under his watch. And I don't think he necessarily, cared too much about open source of the tech, but he recognized it as a way to drive the services opportunity for IBM in a way that allowed them to compete more aggressively with the likes of a Microsoft. And that wound up leading eventually to things like the acquisition of Red Hat. But Dan, I know you were inside IBM later, but how much influence does Lou have to this day in the culture of IBM?
Yeah, I joined, at the tail end of Ginny Rometty's tenure, and it was there mostly under Arvind Krishna. But you would still hear Lou talked about with reverence. The IBM has a lot of long-time employees that have been there, 15, 20, 25, 30 years, and you would certainly hear stories from the Lou Gerstner days. I mean, I think what makes IBM special in a lot of ways is its ability to reinvent itself. I kind of chalk that up mostly to IBM Research in my mind, which is kind of the crown jewel and allows them to avoid missing any of these big, kind of revolutions in the tech landscape. But, all of those kind of reinventions require, strong and bold leadership. And, certainly I think Lou gets a lot of credit for that. Much the way, that Arvind, I think, is getting that now. Interesting, Lou driving the shift a little bit more to services, Arvind driving it a little bit more back to product.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, which is Lou really taught IBM that it can change, that it can reinvent itself. We see it happening right now. The pivot, the move back to software development is a big emphasis for them. And they know they've got some catch up to do, but they're tackling it. They're going after it. You see it in products like Project Bob, their own IDE for doing agentic development. Leveraging, things like the research you talked about. I mean, think about Watson and Watson X and how far that's come along, and that started in the Gerstner era. So there are a lot of seeds that were planted with him. So I think we're going to see a different looking IBM in 5 years than what it is.
What was interesting to me about Lou, though, he's the only IBM outsider to become CEO. Before him, it was all IBM people. And since Lou, it's been all IBM people. So it's an interesting thing that, if you're going to be the CEO of IBM, you've got to be there a long time.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. No, Kate, you go.
They thought when Lou came in that he was basically just there to watch it die, to slowly die, and he did quite the opposite. So,
I think back, and I'm a child of my times, right? And I should say that up front, but there was a period of time there in the late 80s and 90s where we saw men for their time, and unfortunately it was men. We didn't have many women CEOs back then, right? But there were men for their time who rose to the occasion that saved iconic companies, the Lee Iacocca's of the world, the Lou Gerstners of the world. Steve Jobs coming back to Apple, right? They really put these companies on their back to a certain extent and drag, that old saying, when the footprints in the sand, there's that whole thing, right? That was when I was carrying you. These men carried these companies through their lowest periods in some ways and back up, to the incline. I don't know if we'd have an IBM today, frankly, if not for Lou Gerstner, right? You had antitrust situations going on. IBM, every division in there was fighting with each other. If you didn't like the price you got from this group, you went to that group. I remember when I sold my first company and I went to work for the company that bought it, and we were putting together Interliant. We were a big Lotus Notes shop, right? IBM had bought Lotus at the time, and IBM was an investor. I did a $10 million investment with IBM into Interliant. And so we worked really closely. At the time it was IBM Global Services. And this is when Lou first came in. This is 98, 99, 2000. And he's changing. He's going to services, we were so afraid that they weren't going to let us host notes and let IBM's sales team sell our hosted notes package. But Lou said, we don't care who's hosting it, right? It's about delivering to the customer what they want. And if you have a good hosted notes, and at the time we had built some, look, for those of you can make fun of notes all you want, but that notes server was a monster. You could make it do anything. And we had customized the hell out of it. And we had a whole platform, really a platform that ran on it. And he loved it. And he's the one who pushed it through and said, you're going to sell this. And that it quickly became 50, 60% of our sales, right? IBM. We were a big IBM partner. And they made our company, and we did the IPO, and we did the whole thing. So for that, I'm grateful to him for what he did. And it's a huge, huge legacy he leaves. I'm sorry to see him pass away.
You really look.
Go
Go ahead, Chris.
I was just going to say, Alan touched on it. So in 1990, I was at General Electric when Jack Walsh was there, right? And
another one.
Right. And I was running the video conference center. And I took the job, and we were in the office job, so I got to wear a tie. We all wore ties, right? And then I always forget his name. One of the second in commands came in, and he sat there for 2 days, and I ran the conference centers. He interviewed the executives and the people on the shop floor, and I realized we had a story. GE had a story again, right? We don't wear ties. We get the work done. We actually fired the most senior person in the plant in South Carolina and implemented the most junior person's recommendations because it bloody made sense. And I can tell you, across the company, we suddenly knew who we were. And with John Chambers at Cisco in 2000, you see these, it's about giving the group a story, right? Who are we? Why are we here? You can feel it in the room. We all know that. If the team of the company knows why we're here and what we're doing, you can turn goat milk into gasoline. And if you don't, you can get work done. Maybe that's the difference.
Kate?
I'm always dubious of the great man of history theory of life, where people look back in time and put it on one person, because I always think it's a combination of events and people, and somebody's got to be at the front of that parade. But I always say, it takes more than one person. And I'll also go back to what Alan was just talking about. So yes, IBM did hosted notes. Then Sam Palmisano came along a few years later and wound up apologizing to all IBM's channel partners for taking business direct. And that's just the wave of cycle and how things go back and forth. And it's funny, I was trying to explain Lou Gerstner's impact to somebody who was in their 30s the other day, and they nodded their heads and they said, that's pretty much how all companies now operate these days. So what was the big deal? How come they couldn't figure out the fact that they needed to kill products that weren't successful?
There you go. Kate, I'll give you a last word.
Well, to Mike's point, it's what makes sense. And it's unfortunate that it takes us, that we look at this, something that can be so simple, and that we just can't wrap our heads around it, so good for simple. Keep it simple, right? Isn't that the logo that,
There are a few companies out there that need a Lou Gerstner, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I'll throw one last question out at you. Do you think with the, Monday morning quarterback and the lens of history, the current crop of tech CEOs, the Jensen Huangs, the Sam Altmans, the Elons, are they in the same category as the Jack Welches and the Lou Gerstners and the Lee Iacocca's?
History has to tell.
Well, that's a good point, Chris. But I don't see that, and I don't see those characteristics in this new leadership at all. So that's
I think the book is still out on Jensen Huang. We'll see what NVIDIA becomes. He may wind up being in that class.
Mitch, Dan, I'll give you your chance to.
I'll just jump in real quick. I think we are in an era of a different kind of leader. We're in the influencer kind of accumulating, building companies in that way. Less about execution, more about vision and moving the market. That's not to say some or many of them will be viewed as great leaders. It's about building great companies that are built with great people. And the leaders that do that again, with it, whatever method, I think will be the ones that stand out, whether it's Jensen or you can pick any, Musk or any of the other tech bros, company leaders that might be possible to look at that in the future.
Dan, you got last word.
Yeah, I'll agree with Mitch a little bit in that I think it's a very different job now, right? It's a lot less about the internal, a lot more about the external. You're much more the face and the spokesperson of the company. I mean, just think about, how many more different ways we've got to communicate and the frequency at which these leaders are kind of out there for all to see. I think it's shifted to a little bit more, kind of external visionary type of role versus so much that kind of internal, manager.
And if I could just add one thing, it's a quote on back of the book that I held up. Gerstner says, "I came to see in my time at IBM that culture isn't just one aspect of the game, it is the game. In the end, an organization is nothing more than the collective capacity of its people to create value." So to Mitch's point, it's the organization. So the people.
Actually, you folks watching this have the last word. And if you want to comment in on this while we're here, we try to answer it. But even if you comment after, we do have some of our editors and folks coming in and monitoring the comments and answering them. We hope you like this new live format. We're going to try it again tomorrow. We'll keep doing it. It'll get better every day, I hope. But that's going to wrap up today's show. Mitch, Dan, Kate, Chris, Mike, thank you. Thank you for watching. We hope you like TechStrong Gang Live, and we'll see you tomorrow. Until then, we do have TechStrong TV coming on. And again, quick pitch, predict 2026, be there, techstrongevents.com. Bye-bye, everyone.